All right, welcome to the second week of classes. Now, my apologies. My preference would be to read all your, um, watch your Flipgrid videos and read all your assignments and see how we're doing on Connect and then respond to anything you're having issues with. But today is Thursday and those won't come in until Sunday. So what I might do is if we're having major problems with something or major questions, I might record an extra video just kind of wrapping it up. But for now, I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is demand and supply. So, before we get started, I want you guys to Google something. Google Beeple, the first 5,000 days. And maybe you can pause while you look it up. I have Googled this, and I'm going to show you. Beeple makes something called NFTs, and honestly, I forget what they even are. But basically, it's digital art. Okay, so this guy, Beeple, who you can actually watch interviews with, he's like a super normal looking guy. He makes these pieces of artwork, and what you buy is like the digital artwork. It's very odd, okay? But the reason I had you Google it is because he made the news last year. This was March 11th of last year. Yep. Look at the price he got. And actually, I don't think he got it. I think this was a secondary sale. I think someone had bought it from him for like $6,000 and then they resold it. So he's not getting this money. Whatever, it's $69 million, right? And I remember when I first started teaching and a Picasso sold or something like that for $70 million or something. It was a huge deal, right? It had shattered records. This isn't even a painting. You're like buying a right to have the thing on your computer. So it's very, very odd. I actually taught a class on economics and art a few years ago, and it's fascinating. So if you look at the art market, it's like the financial market on steroids. People actually buy artwork just as investments sometimes, right? So we had an appraiser come to my class, and she said there's these vaults in New Jersey for rich New Yorker people. And they'll buy a painting, like a David Hockney painting or something. He's like a hot artist right now. And they just put it in this vault. Like they don't even look at it. They just buy it as a future investment. And then the vault like changes every night which position it's in. It's this very odd world. So what we see happen is because of really unique things with supply and demand of artwork, we see crazy swings in the value of artwork. So what I would invite you guys to do, you've all learned supply and demand before. I'm going to go through the basics, right? Some of you have actually asked me, you know, I'm ready for a refresher on this. I want to go through the basics of supply and demand. A lot of you have been teaching this for like 12 years. Try and use the supply and demand model to discuss people. So why the price would be so high. And we'll return to it later on in the recording. So supply and demand is, it's a review for a lot of you, but it's actually a really complicated model. So what I'm going to do for this week is just keep it on the material, okay? I'm going to separate this lecture into 15-minute segments because that's what I think is the best practice. And we're going to have a homework assignment. What I will also do is I'm going to have a test your comprehension video where I give you sample problems and then I work through them, probably on an actual board on campus. But we're not going to mess around with like discussion boards this week or Flipgrid or anything like that. This is going to be one goal: understand, review, supply, and demand. So why should you care, right? One thing I always tell students is it takes 27 times to really understand a model. So some economists figured this out at some point. And, you know, I've reached 27 times with this one, but especially in the beginning of my career when I wasn't teaching all that often, like when I was in grad school, there were little nuances that I would pick up on every time I learned it or taught it, and it was kind of cool. But even if you're an expert, it's probably helpful to watch other people teach it. It certainly is for me. So for example, when I watch my colleague Niru teach supply and demand, she is way more mathematical than I am, and it's really helpful. It's really cool. The other thing is, Last year when I taught supply and demand, it happened to be when campus shut down. We were in a campus-wide quarantine, so I had to do it online, and I discovered economics memes. So I have a lot of them. I think you will enjoy. Here's one. I don't always drink beer, but when I do, when the price falls, I drink more of it. Those of you who have taught micro before, though, might say, I don't know, it's pretty inelastic, right? But we'll get to that. So, demand. What is demand? Demand is, I always tell students, it's a line of people, and you say, how much are you willing to pay for coffee, right? And there's someone who's always like a coffee fanatic, and they're willing to pay like $8. I had a grad student last year. She was also like the women's soccer coach. $8 she would have paid for coffee. She was tired. Then you have the student who's like, I hate coffee. You'd have to pay me to drink it, right? And then there's people in between. But then you've got other people, right? Like Nicole, or other situations. Nicole, for the first cup of coffee, would pay $8, but for the second, maybe it's $6. So you take all of this information and you've got the relationship between the total quantity, say, of coffee and price per unit of a good. All consumers are willing and able to purchase, holding other variables constant. Now this is a value thing, right? So willing to purchase, a lot of times we just think of that. How much would you pay for coffee? But by saying able to, we're recognizing that even though markets are efficient, they're efficient given the constraint of what people are able to do. Maybe someone doesn't have money. Maybe someone doesn't have access to coffee. Maybe someone's got a health condition where they can't drink it, something like that. So we call it a law of demand. The quantity of a good consumers are willing and able to purchase increases as the price falls. If it's cheaper, you drink more beer. It decreases as the price rises. If beer, so like, I don't know if you guys have been to Cubs games. I used to be a Cubs fan, but then they moved it off the cable that I have, and now I literally have not watched a game. Back when I was a Cubs fan, I would go to Wrigley Field, and the price of beer was like $10, right? I did not drink so many beers at the field. So when the price rises, I would drink less. So they're inversely related. Now it's important that we use the word law. Some textbooks use a law of supply, some do not. There's more likely to be weird supply out there, but demand is not weird. Even for something that you think of as super necessary, like insulin, if the price of insulin became $2 million, people wouldn't be able to afford it anymore and less would be sold. All right. So I would encourage you to think about what it looks like. You don't have to draw it, but maybe before I click the next slide, what's it going to look like? Whoops. Look how fancy this is. Looks like this, a downward sloping line. Try not to get too hung up on the numbers at this point. We will go through this algebraically, but for now it's just helpful to think it has a negative slope. Done. Negative slope. By the way, I have a friend who got her MBA from Northwestern, and I said, oh, Angela, how's your economics class? She said, I don't like my professor. I said, why? He draws linear demand curves. I was like, I draw linear demand curves. Why don't you like that? She's like, it's not realistic. We're making assumptions in this model, right? A realistic demand curve is not like something I'm particularly interested in. So I tend to draw linear ones. Okay, and by the way, there are assumptions we're making in this model. I'm not going to test you on them at this point. We're assuming homogeneous goods, so like 1 cup of coffee is the same as another cup of coffee. We're assuming a perfectly competitive market, which is important. We're assuming many buyers and many sellers, and we're assuming perfect information. Kind of doesn't matter that much, because even in, say, the market for oil, where there's market power, right, like OPEC has market power, it's still a really good model for general trends. So we kind of, we don't just use perfectly competitive examples because they're boring. All right, this is super important, you guys. I'm going to try to trick you on this. I'm telling you right now. There's a difference between a change in quantity demanded and a change in demand. A change in demand is when the whole curve shifts. So like hand sanitizer, right? Hand sanitizer in March of 2020, we just wanted more of it. That was a change in demand, that was an increase in demand. A movement along the curve is a change in quantity demanded. So it's like if all of a sudden hand sanitizer becomes $50 a bottle, fewer people will purchase it. Nothing's happened to demand. That's a movement along the curve. In fact, I'll go back here. If you think about just the price increasing, that just moves along the curve. That's a change in quantity demanded. But as I said before, demand can change. An increase in demand looks like this. Hand sanitizer in 2020. Decrease in demand, going to the movies in 2020, right? So that's something we'll be covering, and I do expect you to know. So this isn't a meme, but I thought it was kind of funny. Toilet paper, right? What in the world happened with toilet paper? Well, there was an increase in demand, right? And demand, the quantity demanded was greater than the quantity supplied. So what caused the increase in demand? I did research, actually, as I was trying to find toilet paper. Number one, more people were working from home, so they needed more toilet paper. And number two, hysteria, right? You started hearing, oh my gosh, there's no toilet papers. And then you see it and you buy a bunch of it. All right, so these are demand shifters. Depending on the level of the class, I can spend like a week on this, okay? I'm going to assume that most of you have done this before. If you haven't, we have a good textbook that you can look at, but I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. And so please ask me to meet separately if you have questions. Looks like we're at 12 minutes here, so I might end up stopping in the middle of this one. So, changes in income. A normal good is a good where when people get richer, they buy more. Luxury cars, restaurant meals, foreign travel, things like that. An inferior good is a good where when you get rich, you buy less of it. Public transportation, Goodwill, McDonald's, Revlon Cosmetics actually operates as an inferior good. Walmart, Hyundai cars tend to be inferior goods. So one thing that's on your homework that I'm going to assign says something like, are inferior goods worse? No, right? Like I've gotten really cool clothes at Goodwill. It's just a behavior thing. When income goes up, you buy less of that. Ramen noodles is the classic example. When I was teaching this in fall of 2020, I said, okay, guys, what is something that, I think I said, what is something that when you graduate, you never want to use again? And the student was ready to give an answer, and he didn't listen to the question. He goes, toilet paper. And we all laughed. But think about like really cheap toilet paper, like Scott brand toilet paper. That would be an inferior good. All right, prices of related goods. Substitutes are goods that you use instead of each other. Laptops or desktops. Ibuprofen or Tylenol. I get migraines, so like triptans versus like this Nurtec stuff that I take. So a substitute good, chicken and turkey. If the price of chicken goes up, more people will buy turkey. They are directly related. Complements you use together. iPhones and iPhone cases, right? Like a Roku and a Netflix subscription. A Kindle and electronic books. You use them together. Coffee and cream. So think about, let's think about the Roku and the Netflix thing. Let's say Roku is super cheap for some reason, like a Roku stick. The demand for Netflix is going to go up because you use them together. All right, advertising and consumer tastes. I think I'm going to stop here. We're at about 15 minutes, and I'm going to start another video at this point.